We're here at CGP London in Southwark Park with Paul Carter to talk about his exhibition Municipal. Perhaps we can start by talking a little about where the title of the exhibition, Municipal, comes from. I know that your quasi-architectural sculptural installations, both here and in previous exhibitions, they're based on public buildings and often quite communist architecture, and they reference functionality and dysfunctionality and places as a social exchange. So it's quite complex ideas. Can you maybe expand on all of that a little?
Well, I mean, I think the title Municipal of the show, I mean, there's an interest in the idea of what is municipal, in a sense. What is the this gathering, or this gathering of people, or of a community, or of different structures, political, cultural, and how they function and how they sort of dysfunction in some sense. So there was sort of like this interest in trying to understand the possibilities of what municipal is and how it, their potentialities and the idea of them functioning and dysfunctioning. So I think that's why I worked with the sort of the idea or the title of Municipal. It's trying to understand what objects to actually that can exist within this municipal of things, or in this gathering of people who are exchanging ideas, exchanging money, exchanging sort of stuff. And this is the interest in the hotel as well, I think, in a sense, or the architectures of the municipal. Probably about 10 years ago, I started as a device for me to sort of understand more of my practice. I was starting to sort of call all buildings a hotel of sorts. Even my studio, I'd walk down streets and sort of like just look at people's houses and sort of assume that they were, or look at them as being hotels. And it was about this sort of idea of access and the idea of sort of free access, or crossing the threshold into sort of like another building and ownership as well, and whether or not who was the guest and who was the service worker, and trying to sort of in some way or another break down those roles, and not really knowing who was doing what and who was servicing who and who was sort of exchanging what with things. So, and that's continued on with this piece as well. I think with this show. I mean, within the show, I mean, I think there's 4 what I sometimes think of distinct sort of pieces of work, or separate pieces of work, but they're massively connected. Their spaces in between them are completely significant. And actually, when more I think about the show, sometimes it's what's not here that's really quite important, or what's suggesting something elsewhere that's going on. With the hotel piece, which is the concrete wall and the sign, it's about the idea of how big. I'm not sure about the scale of this hotel, how big this piece is, how many floors it goes up, how many floors it possibly goes down, how deep it is, the type of residents that are in there, the type of hotel managers, the service workers, I'm not sure of who these people are. So this idea of the possibility of what's going on behind there, in a sense, 4-star, 1-star. I mean, I'm interested in what the possibility is behind there, in a sense.
And the wall you actually had put into the gallery? Yeah,
no, it's a rendered concrete wall that's referencing what I think of brutalist sort of architecture as well, sort of sometimes just the concrete slab of something. I mean, we can't at the moment physically access this hotel. I'm not sure whether the door is the other side or whatever, or whether I'm actually in the hotel, or whether it is behind there, whether the gallery's been built onto the hotel or the hotel's been built onto the gallery, or whether this is the hotel as well to a certain extent. I mean, that's interesting for me, the sort of metaphors that potential metaphors that might be in there, and rooms and activities of stuff. The idea of I mean, it's a concrete wall, but I can't hear anything. So the idea of listening
Do you imagine that the visitors play a role in this hotel? Do they maybe become the staff and the guests?
I very much hope so, that idea that there's an invitation to something that's an invitation that only takes you so far in some way or another. There's only so much of a notion of host, or the idea of sort of like inviting sort of somebody in and them being immersed in sort of something. I mean, this is where the lift becomes quite a central piece of work for me in the sense of its connection to this wall as well. I mean, the lift, if I think of it as a sculptural and also installation-based sort of thing, it's like it's not too sure of its object status, and it's not too sure of its room status, in the sense of the exterior of walking around it, or the idea of the interior of walking within it, in a sense. So it's quite indecisive of what it is in some ways, the sculptural object, and I quite like that notion. For me, this is very central to me understanding the idea of making objects, or making some form that you hand over to other people to exchange with in some way or another, and its communicability, in a sense. The idea of walking around this elevator as an object, and the idea of walking within the elevator as immersive installation of some sort, with the possibility of possibly taking you somewhere else. And it's the metaphorical sort of like content of the other rooms that it might be suggesting. I mean, it's called Room 36, and sometimes I get when I've listed this work beforehand or shown it elsewhere, I've actually forgotten that it's Room 36 and called it Room 37 or whatever, forgotten the actual room number, and it's that for me is okay. I'm quite happy with that. It's not, it can't really find its room or its place to a certain extent, and which is the nature of a lift. The elevator is I mean, if I come back to what I was saying earlier on about the idea of what's not here is important as well. It's like the building's been taken away from this elevator. The lift shaft has gone. Perhaps this lift shouldn't be here. It should be within the hotel to a certain extent. So this space in between these two things is quite important for me. That sort of they're not actually quite sitting comfortably. There's a tension there that I really quite like, in a way. That scale is such an important issue with all the works within the show, I think. The idea of the scale of the hotel, the size, how big, how small, how many floors there possibly might be referring to within the elevator. And then if I come back to the piece of work, the Municipal blue piece, that has got what I sort of consider a more human, not a human scale, but more of a scale of the body to a certain extent. You know, it is referring to, I mean, the Municipal blue in the title is referring to the actual colour. I mean, the colour blue that's in these pieces, I've always been interested in it. It's always been a colour that for me refers to big civic architectural structures, bridges, and it's like, for me, or even swimming pools or something. These places, it's just the colour has always referred to some civic structure of some sort, and they're interesting sort of places of people coming to. But the idea that these pieces could be possibly for the guests of the Municipal or the hotel, or the service workers or the residents or the whatever, that they're using these what I'm sort of I was trying to refer to as urinals that you have access to. But I mean, there's always been, when you referred to earlier on about the idea of architectural dysfunction and functionality to a certain extent. I've always been interested in these corners, the corners of buildings that end up being these piss corners. These sort of where and all buildings seem to have them. They always sort of like seem to invite mainly men to sort of stand up and piss in a corner of some sort in somewhere. So they have this sort of like functionality, but are quite dysfunctional to a certain degree in relation to the architecture. But I've always sort of interested in that idea of a communality as well within the thing, the idea of layering of thing, and it as being a gesture, which is what I think I'm trying to refer to within these pieces. This is, for me, it's the closest I can get sometimes to a idea of communal activity of some sort. The idea of the return visit of people weeing on these. I've got no problem if sort of somebody did come into the gallery and actually use them as they, and it would be interesting for me to sort of, for that to happen. But there's gestures, there's sort of indecisive gestures, I think, that are going on within these things, and I like this idea of the divisions between, or these being as divisions. And I've always been interested in the idea of divisions as suggesting a connectivity of some sort. So this idea of trying to isolate is the only communal thing in some way or another, that we're connected in our isolation. These are a continuation from a piece of work that I was working on with panels that were flat, more two-dimensional up against the wall, that were concrete and were referring to the pissed corners, architectural pissed corners that I was talking about earlier, which I was sort of like finding there was too much of a distance within the viewer and the actual work itself in some way. And that when I started pulling these things off the wall, in a sense, or having them right angles, there seemed to be more of an invitation to actually participate to a certain degree in the work. So, and in a sense, getting rid of the concrete. I mean, originally there was going to be concrete that was going to be poured in these, but it wasn't necessary. There's a sort of sense of a fluidity that's going on with them, in the sense of the reference to urine or the reference to spray paint. There's different gestures, I think, that are going on within these works.
What are they? Is it glass?
In between, there is a polypropylene sheet that's had spray paint on it, in the sense that, for me, there's a gesture there of some sort, and that's in between two sheets of glass, and then you have the
so the blue is polypropylene.
Yes.
And the yellow in the top corners.
For me, that's another gesture, is another placing. That was always sort of, I always, that's something that I've used in the past, these transparent, yellow, even quite urine colouring of some sort. But these were like, these I sometimes think of as heads. They're the idea of a return visit. You know, there's either three or whatever. It's the idea of coming back to. And for me, that's the idea of just some sort of like layering. Again, another gesture. The idea of placing sort of something on sort of something, and then the idea of the gesture of the spray mark, and then the idea of the gesture of the piss stain, in a sense, or the idea of urinating against it in some sense as a gesture. Which I think links into the idea of the lift as well. As lifts are often used as in certain buildings as places to have a wee in. It can look very manic. The lift can look. I can change the doors opening, closing to sort of like being really. And its persona then sort of changes to a certain extent with the doors opening. The object, in a sense, becomes more of a manic object in some way, which I'm quite interested in, but at the moment it's attempting to function on the level of a lift in, I'm not sure whether it's a hotel or whether it's a housing estate or whether it's in a government building or whether it's in probably some penthouse suite in the middle of central London, or even New York or something. I mean, its location is here at the moment, but the idea of its possible location and the idea of walking into it and being at another location, in a sense, is sort of elsewhere as well, I think.
So it does take you places, as you're saying, because in your mind it could take the visitor anywhere.
Yeah.
Do you use lifts on a regular basis yourself? Because I know you've got claustrophobia, or do you...
I don't, but it's never been I think my claustrophobia comes from probably a sculptural sensibility, or the sensibilities of space in a sense. You know, the idea of understanding objects or understanding spaces, or actually phenomenologically feeling spaces in a sense. And I think the idea of claustrophobia coming from the idea of being restricted within a space in a sense is, I think that is key. I think it is a sensibility that's part and parcel of the practice. I don't feel scared with this lift because I know that it's not going to be stuck in the middle, and I know I can get out in some way without things. I mean, it is interesting for me to be in here and be. I'm not even sure where I am, or whether I'm talking to myself, or whether or somebody else is in there. But again, that's sculptural. That's sculptural for me. And is this activity of walking around and understanding this sort of object that probably doesn't need to be understood here, but is it understood in more in here, or on this floor? So that's quite a new experience for me to talk through that. But I'm back in the space again. And I'm waiting for the other residents to probably appear of some sort, or the other, and I'm not sure who they're going to be, but somebody's called it, I think.
Okay, and then there's one final work around the corner in here, which is a film work.
And this piece, Edit, which consists of somebody within a space who's wearing a black puffer jacket, who's ripping this puffer jacket off, and feathers are starting to sort of like fly around. I really enjoy the sort of the idea of a softness within the feathers, and then this harshness of some raw activity that's going on, that's possibly some sort of frustration, but is also quite playful in the sense of a pillow fight, but it's still, there's a certain sort of possible crisis of materiality of sort of things going on there, and its connection with this show, I think, is about, again, trying to understand one's place within a municipality, within the municipal, within the social sort of exchange or structure of things. And there's a certain sort of isolation that goes on with, or there seems to be an isolated activity that's going on within the video, but that we're distanced from, which again is the nature of video and documentation of sorts. But are we possibly connected in any way with this activity? So I mean, it's a key work. It's a key work for me, and within the title, it's an invitation to me and possibly other people of at what point is this edited, or how do we edit? Or how do we sort of change, or how do we remake, or how do we reinterpret, or talk about this sort of exchange of things, or the closeness, or the connect, or how we're connected and how we're disconnected, in a sense. And I think